Good morning. Here's your early morning briefing for Friday, the 31st of January, 2025. I'm your host, Mark Nielsen. We're joined by the team, Jared, Mike, and Robert. Let's jump inside the Beltway first. So Trump will be following through with his blanket tariffs on Canada and Mexico. So he has confirmed just recently that, yes, in fact, he will be imposing a 25% blanket tariff on all imports from Mexico and Canada. And this will start tomorrow, February 1st. Now, the administration has yet to decide whether those blanket tariffs will include oil imports. It's worth mentioning that the United States currently imports nearly 60% of its crude oil from Canada. And so this has yet to be determined. But these 25% blanket tariffs are having major effects on the markets, on diplomacy as well. And in coming days, I'm sure that we'll have more insight on how this will start to affect the geopolitical picture. Moving forward, also, Trump is also considering, the Trump administration is considering placing the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau under the oversight of the Treasury Department or the Office of Management and Budget. Robert, could you give us a little bit of insight on this and why Trump would be pushing to recategorize, or I guess put the CFPB under Treasury?
Yeah, CFPB was one of those independent regulators, financial regulators, that has been accused of doing this debanking effort, using nudging banks to debank individuals that are designated as politically exposed persons. And I think this is a move to bring them under the oversight of the Trump administration more directly to prevent those, debanking efforts.
All right, thanks, Robert. And then finally, the U.S. Department of Defense confirmed yesterday that DoD employees were connecting their work computers to Chinese servers to access the new DeepSeek AI chatbot for at least 2 days before the Pentagon moved to shut off access. Robert, what's going on with this?
Yeah, I think even more important than the fact that they've accessed it for 2 days before the Defense Information Systems Agency was able to block access. One of the official who said that this happened also said that an earlier version of DeepSeek was accessed using DoD workstations in 2024, but it didn't raise any red flags with officials because the connection to China was unclear. And I think it's possible that China-linked hackers gained further access to Defense Department networks in 2024, and this would be happening around the same time that the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency said that it detected early signs of the Salt and Silk Typhoon hacks on government networks prior to the announcement of the Treasury Department hack. And China, as we've talked about over the last 2 years, already has extensive access to U.S. critical infrastructure and telecom networks, and I think has almost certainly infiltrated other U.S. government networks beyond the Treasury Department.
Yeah, and Robert, so I understand it. I think DIA, that's the Defense Intelligence Agency, is currently doing a full assessment of this DeepSeek AI chatbot, and then also the access to the servers. I'm sure that we'll hear a little bit more about what it finds as we move forward. But yeah, this seems to be a critical vulnerability, and I guess we have yet to see what effect and impact that will have. All right, and then last but not least, inside the Beltway for our hearings for the day, we don't have any hearings scheduled that we'll be monitoring. There's nothing significant to report, but that goes without saying that as next week's pickup, we will continue to monitor some of these congressional hearings and report back anything significant for you. All right, let's move on now to our warning items for the day. Robert, I want to start with this fight going on in Florida right now. I think it has major implications for the rest of the nation, but this is centered around immigration and its relationship with the ag industry. And just to provide a little bit of perspective here, Florida has an enormous agricultural industry. It has a big effect on policy. All the farm bill, for example, a lot of these things are going to be centered on Florida. It's ground zero for agriculture, and then also, as we've seen with Governor DeSantis, also in the fight over illegal immigration, how we work through that. So, Robert, what's going on down there? Could you please tell us about this conflict?
So I saw this fight starting earlier in the week, and this is over what's called the Tackling and Reforming Unlawful Migration Policy Act. So DeSantis called the Florida legislature into an emergency session. They gavelled out and gavelled back in, and this seems to be a fight happening between the governor's office, Governor DeSantis wanted tighter immigration laws at the state level. He actually also wanted to include taxes on remittances and blocks on remittances in this immigration bill. But this bill, if it is passed, even though DeSantis has said he's going to veto it, they could try to pass it with a veto-proof majority. It's going to place the authority over illegal immigration in the state to under the control of Florida Agriculture Commissioner Wilton Simpson. This is important because I think this bill is an attempt to preempt stricter immigration enforcement by making Wilton Simpson the chief immigration officer, because Simpson has deep ties to the agriculture industry and has pushed back against deportation. I think it's possible we'll see similar attempts in other ag-heavy Republican-controlled states to preempt deportations using similar bills.
Now, Robert, for those who are kind of the uninitiated on these fights, this is a huge component of the illegal immigration issue. It's a big problem because in the United States, we often hear that we're talking about illegal immigration undercutting wages, depressing wages, but really, when we're talking about Florida being ground zero here, it's because the agricultural industry this is such an impact on ag production. So there's millions of illegal immigrants that are employed, often under the table, with different agricultural different parts of the ag industry in Florida and California and so on. One thing that I want to just bring up here for those who aren't familiar is that right now, every one of these ag producers has the ability to bring in unlimited amount of immigrants through guest worker programs. They're almost unlimited. These spots almost are never taken entirely. They're never filled out. But any ag producer can bring in on a guest worker visa almost unlimited amount of seasonal labor. Now, where this kind of creates an interesting conundrum is that although they've had access to this, most of these programs go they kind of have been neglected. They go unfilled. So these positions that they bring in, a certain amount of seasonal workers, while many ag producers will still kind of rely on those, they really have been underutilized for years. Now, this would make sense because of the amount of illegal immigration that we've had. But one of the problems that it puts, I guess, the ag industry in is if you do bring in workers through these guest worker programs, there's a 25% upcharge, essentially. Like, you're going to be paying 25% more than minimum wage as an effort to, I guess, because the legislation allowing for this is to prevent, American workers from missing out on opportunities to work. And so there's already built into these guest worker programs a 25% margin over minimum wage. So obviously the economics are that if you have an unlimited pool of illegal immigrants who can work at that minimum wage or even lower, you're going to go for that. And so, Robert, when we're looking at this situation, I think you're exactly right. We're not just talking about Florida. I think that this would have implications across the nation, a state like Idaho. Have you seen any a similar fight breaking out in other parts of the United States? Like, what would be the implications for what we're seeing happening in Florida right now?
Well, I haven't seen any specific bills yet from other states, but I think this does serve as a model for how there could effectively be some pressure put from the ag industry on state legislatures to pass something similar. I did see, we reported on earlier, I think this week or last week, there was a big ag industry lobbying organization meeting in Texas. And I think the other kind of angle they're taking on this is to try to make those H-2A visas be year-round rather than seasonal. So I think they're also preparing for the potential that the mass deportation operations do hit the ag industry, and they're trying to find an alternative that will still allow them to have some cheap labor.
And Robert, have you seen any punitive measures? So, like, we're talking about offering a little bit more of the carrot. Do you see anything dealing with penalties? I know that there have been talks. I know Ron DeSantis, for example, we're talking about Florida. He's been a big proponent of using things like E-Verify, other measures to hold businesses accountable to hire illegal immigrant labor. Have you seen any of that?
Well, I think there was talk about pushing, especially before Trump's inauguration, about pushing E-Verify more heavily. I haven't seen any moves on that yet. What DeSantis actually wanted was was a lot more of a carrot or a stick approach. He originally wanted the legislature to pass a form of this bill that included ending in-state tuition for children of illegal immigrants. He also wanted to block remittances. That's a big I think portion of this whole illegal immigration picture is just how much of some of these countries the illegal immigrants come from, their economy relies significantly on remittances, and that's another, I think, stick approach that we could see some resistance to ag industry trying to preempt deportations, is then going after the remittances.
All right, thanks, Robert. Okay, moving on to our next warning item for the day. Trump, it looks like, Robert, we were actually talking about this a little bit before the show. Jared, excuse me. Jared, apologies. So we were talking about this a little bit before the show, talking about this concept of having a safe third country for helping to curb illegal immigration, mitigate the flow. Could you tell us a little bit more about this concept of a safe third country and a soft wall for illegal immigration?
Yes. So President Trump sent Secretary of State Marco Rubio to finalize deals for safe third countries, which is a repeat of what he did in his first term. Now, in his first term, he had Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras on side. Right now, as far as I can tell, Guatemala and El Salvador are the most likely to just say, yes, we'll do this again. And that's because both of them are kind of looking to expand their workforce. Guatemala already said outright, we want them to come here and work with the skills that you guys taught them. So thank you. And El Salvador just discovered that massive gold mine, and they're looking to develop anyway now that they've reduced their crime. So they will need a workforce. But the last remaining country, Honduras, has voiced strong opposition, which we've covered pretty extensively here on the Early Warning Network, to Trump's deportations, and I think will likely refuse and then have to be negotiated into becoming a safe third country. Now, as far as what this actually does, to me, this kind of looks like for those who have ever done any kind of missile defense or listened to them, a soft kill, hard kill strategy where you have a diversionary tactic. So if you're treating the migrants as, hey, we need to get them somewhere else, you entice them with safe third countries. This also provides legal cover. The safe third country comes from an internationally recognized legal term for asylum seekers. So you can say, hey, these are the closest safe countries that you can have. Go there. But at the same time, if there are opportunities for them to be employed, that takes away a lot of their legal arguments for coming to the United States. And then that's backed up with Trump's border wall, which has been a pretty enormous pillar of his platform since the first term. And as far as I know, it's still largely up, and I think they're going to finish construction here, or at least attempt to. So that would be an actual physical barrier to the United States of America. So any migrants that for whatever reason did not get caught in the soft wall would eventually be stopped physically by the hard wall.
And I think another, for a little bit of perspective globally, we're already seeing this happening in Europe right now. I know that Meloni over in Italy has been really championing this same kind of concept by using, I believe it's different areas in the Balkans as well, to create this kind of safe third country or create a soft wall. There's different off-site deportation and processing centers in which many of the migrants can kind of be collected together before they hit the main part of the European continent. And then this can become a little bit more manageable. So far, though, I think that those efforts have not really, there's been a lot of talk. I know that they've made a lot of investment in some of these facilities, or trying to, make these different diplomatic efforts are pretty extensive. I don't think that they've proven we haven't really seen them at work for very long. And so I don't know how successful they've been over in Europe, but this is quickly becoming a major topic of conversation around the world. So I imagine that this will be something that we'll see a lot more of, not only from the United States, but also in other parts of the world. Yeah, go ahead, Jared.
Right. So lastly here for the day, the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs warned that America is weaponizing space in response to President Trump's orders to build an Iron Dome for America. Now, this Iron Dome for America includes space-based ICBM interceptors and sensors. Now, I strongly suspect that Russia and China have counter-signaled the weaponization of space because they simply lack the ability to do so themselves and seek to prevent America from establishing space dominance. And this isn't to say that they don't have some weaponizing capabilities in there. We have covered China's anti-satellite capabilities, but I don't think they can do it at the scale that the United States of America can.
And Jared, so let's talk about the strategic value here then. So when we're looking at space, the Trump administration has prioritized this more so, I'd say, than other administrations. We saw the creation of Space Force in Trump's first term. So this has become like a major strategic focus for this administration. What are we looking at though in terms of our geopolitical competitors? Like how are China and Russia, how are they addressing like weaponizing space or looking at space as a strategic priority? What are we looking at in terms of the competition with our rivals around the world?
The Russian one, as far as I can tell, they haven't truly recovered since the fall of the Soviet Union. We covered a couple of weeks ago that Russia is still largely dependent on Kazakhstan, of all places, for even launching out of a cosmodrome. But China has largely been accelerating their ability to get to space. They do intend to have a lunar base. I believe it's by 2030, so about the same timeline that the United States of America has. But China has a much less mature space program than America does. And what the Iron Dome would mean geopolitically is really securing America's second strike capability. This is about nuclear deterrence. First and foremost, it's protecting the homeland. A few weeks ago, I covered a panel where people were actually discussing openly, hey, the second strike protections that we have are fairly thin, and they're also very concentrated and old. So we need to update these, particularly because we have places like China, which came out last summer. They're talking about making a conventionally armed ICBM in order to provide homeland strike capabilities on America as a deterrent for homeland strikes in China. So this is becoming much more prescient, much more relevant to the average American, as this would essentially be your shield for you down on Main Street America.
Yeah, Jared. The last thing is, every time I've been researching this, I'm not well versed in this in space and in some of this as much as you by any means. But when I look at this and I see the response overwhelmingly coming from the press, I just see critique after critique. There's often criticisms about the cost. A lot of people are saying that this makes no sense, that it's smoke and mirrors. I noticed this also, though, when Trump created the Space Force, when he announced that he would be creating a new Space Force entirely. So my question for you is, so when we're looking at this, it seems that the response to this is that Trump and his administration is not very serious about this, that this is not a very serious line of effort. What do you say to that? Do you see this as, is this a sincere effort to address a real problem? Do you think this, how do you treat some of this criticism that he's getting, that this is mostly just a dog and pony show?
I think this is absolutely a serious position to address because I think we covered it on a roundtable a couple weeks ago, but we've definitely talked about it in the back here. The first nation to really weaponize, well, not weaponize, but the first nation to actually establish a foothold in space will effectively dominate the world. This would be like being able to establish the first Navy and have nobody else as even a competitor, not even having the technology to challenge you. And the U.S. is way ahead of everybody else, as far as I can tell, on that, particularly because of the reusable rocket that was accomplished last summer. Now, this also will absolutely play into things like establishing a space-based economy and stuff like that for the revitalization of America. And I think all of that is coming to fruition. I remember back in 2023, I think it was, on Forward Observer, we covered that the Department of Transportation and the Space Force were establishing traffic laws for space. They're taking this extremely seriously and have been for years.
All right. Thanks for that perspective, Jared. All right. So we're going to move on to a few questions. Again, today is Friday, so we will have a roundtable later on at 10 Central Time. So please join us there. Those of you who have asked us questions throughout the week that we haven't been able to get to during the show, we'll be addressing those there. And we'll also be talking about some major areas of focus for the week. And we'll be sharing our thoughts on that. So let's address a few questions, though, for today that I do think are relevant to what we discussed earlier. Robert, this one's for you. So we talked a little bit about DeepSeek. Frozen Nomad asked, is there independent verification of DeepSeek AI claiming to have vast improved efficiency over existing AI projects? And if this is true, does it translate to China having more AI dominance? Or is this just like a niche advantage? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, since this DeepSeek thing first dropped, I've been reading about it, thinking a lot about it. And I have seen some people playing around with it who do say it is more efficient because the amount of information that the Chinese government would want to control, these AI models access to is very limited. Basically, China's government concern is primarily the CCP stability. Like what they tend to censor is any kind of talk of or they don't even necessarily censor criticism of the government, but talk of mass movements, like mass organization of protest movements. And from what I have seen from people playing around with it, is that's basically the only thing it really censors. So I think it is more efficient just because it's not spending so much time trying to discern inputs for certain censored topics. As far as if it is translate to China AI dominance, that's actually what I want to talk about on the roundtable a little bit more today. But I think in short, my answer is probably no.
Okay, and I'm adding a little bit of the market perspective here. There's been a lot of consternation on Wall Street and Silicon Valley, especially from the money guys. So we're talking about investing in AI here in the United States. It's required massive amounts of investment and other inputs. So there, after DeepSeek was revealed, there was a major market fluctuations because really the United States right now, this technology in general, but also primarily AI, is really a kind of a flagship product or technology that's really driving the U.S. economy. And so you saw a major market fluctuations after DeepSeek was revealed. And I was really interested to kind of see what we're looking at when we're looking at banks and private equity and hedge funds. Like, how are these guys looking at DeepSeek? And there was a lot of fear that this could completely disrupt American AI dominance. What's interesting, though, is when you look at the financial side of things, it's being treated, at least by Wall Street and some of these other investors, it's being treated more as a correction than it is as a major disruptor. Now, obviously, this could be all wrong and misplaced, but I tend to kind of take all this a little more seriously when you're talking about people putting their money where their mouth is, right? And so it's been interesting, though, that it seems that even though we've seen a lot of market fluctuations here, that this is being treated more like a correction. So maybe some of the AI technologies that we've been investing so heavily in, maybe they're not, the value of them might be slightly different. But I think the overarching theme coming from this is that there is still a lot of confidence in American AI dominance. And so while we'll continue to monitor this could all change. But I tend to kind of take that seriously when we're talking about putting your money in investments. When we're talking about how the markets view this, I do think that there's a lot more signal there than people would give it credit. And so, if it is in fact just a correction, I think a lot of this talk about American AI dominance being eviscerated by something like DeepSeek are well overblown. But obviously, that could change. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, Robert.
No, I agree, and I think it's so. I saw David Sachs, Sam Altman, and I think even Microsoft came out and said it looks like this is DeepSeek is basically stolen a lot of the AI intellectual property from U.S. AI developers. So to me, this is what this looks like, is just basically a lot of different parts of AI models being developed in the US were just kind of slapped together, and it is more efficient in the case that it doesn't use so much computing power to try to discern inputs or whatever. But I did see another interesting angle on it of like, well, if this is actually China winning, it's cheaper, it doesn't require as much energy. Well, that kind of undermines the US AI argument over needing all of this extra power over the next, 10, 15 years. But going back to this National Bureau of Economic Research paper I talked about, I think last year, it's not a race over who can have the best search engine or chatbot. It's a race over generative AI. And I don't think that's what DeepSeek is. I don't think it necessarily is China winning this AI race.
A great perspective there. Thank you. All right. Moving on, we have a last question. We did have a question regarding the EU's treatment of the immigration crisis over there, somewhat similar to what we're experiencing here. But the question was from Red Flyer. He asked, didn't the EU fight and fine any country that resisted having these illegal immigrants come over? So if any of these countries resisted, we saw this with Hungary. The question is like, didn't the EU crack down pretty heavily on that? That was true in the past. And Robert, I know you might have some thoughts on this as well, but one thing that just to add here is things have really changed since that time. The EU, in almost all of its trade negotiations, when we were even seeing this in the Mercosur trade negotiations just recently, late last year, this issue is top of mind for the European Union. And so we're seeing like the president of the European Union, we're seeing the European Commission treat this as a major priority in cracking down on immigration and finding creative ways to reduce the amount of illegal immigrants coming or migrants coming into Europe, reducing the amount of asylum seekers, but also at the same time finding ways to relocate them to other parts of Europe or just off the coast of the Mediterranean to process some of these people. Maloney, as I already brought up before, is a big part of this effort. She's galvanized a lot of support from other European leaders, but then we're also seeing a major response from countries like Sweden and from Denmark, who are actually taking matters into their own hands and finding creative ways to repatriate a lot of their migrants. And they have not incurred, obviously Sweden's not in the EU, but like Denmark and some of these other countries that have modeled their immigration crackdown after Sweden's, they haven't had a lot of pushback from the European Union. So I think that has significantly changed, and we're going to continue to see that problem being addressed directly by the European Commission. Robert, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, Europe was really the first line in this like mass immigration fight. Political circles has been dubbed pantsuit remigration. Basically, the idea that they pay people not to come or pay countries to take back migrants. I think that was the solution that these countries found to not get on the wrong side of the EU. In the UK, that there's been this whole back and forth, I think, with Rwanda, where they're paying them to take back migrants, to take back deportation flights, and that's the solution, I think. And I think Keir Starmer even said, he basically came out and said that like this whole immigration crisis in Europe was not an accident, it was deliberate policy. And I think that that this is probably the only acceptable form of remigration for them to not get on the wrong side of the EU.
All right, thanks, Robert. Last question, Jared. This one's for you. Coleman asks, how do we know if a conventional ICBM is indeed conventional and not nuclear? This is probably related to our discussion of the Iron Dome. If you know the difference between a conventional or ICBM or a nuclear one, shouldn't that definitely affect the response to such an attack? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that came out during the panel I watched on that, and we also had a rule of thumb on the ship that no, you don't. Everything's nuclear until it's not nuclear.
Okay, excellent. All right, thank you everybody for Robert, Jared, Mike. Thanks for all your input there, the great perspective. Those of you who have dropped questions, we do also appreciate that. As we mentioned before, today we'll be having our roundtable at 10 Central Time. You can also expect today's report in your inbox, and we will also, after the roundtable, be back with you next week at 08 Central Time, the usual time. So please join us there. Again, we really do appreciate all your support. Thanks for tuning in. And as always, stay out front.